by example, we're demonstrating how to engage. Pretend your mic's not working and make sure your students know how to react to you when you are talking. Yeah, trial by fire is how I say, how I describe my experience. I've had a lot of interest in online learning for a long time, actually, for a decade now, but this pandemic has really kind of pushed everything and accelerated the exposure and accelerated the appetite and the interest that folks have. So thank you for joining us today, taking time from your day. I saw that we have folks here from India. I know that we have folks here from the Netherlands that I recognize. I see some folks from the West Coast. Type in the chat where you're coming from so we get a sense for where in the world you're at right now. So we appreciate whatever the time of the day is for you, whatever it is that you're doing. It's wonderful to see an international interest in this topic of hybrid learning, but also how to be thoughtful about engaging your audience. And so it's not just about hybrid classrooms and pedagogy around hybrid, but it's also about creating that engagement and getting to know people when we're kind of limited to online and virtual instruction, and maybe some in-person instruction, but we'll talk about it. It also has its limitations. So first, I congratulated you for being here. I'm going to go ahead and share my slides, and I'm going to walk through a deck for a few minutes, telling you a little bit about my experience and some observations that I've noted over the time that I've been doing this. And this is intended to be a dialogue. So if you have questions, please type them in the Q&A, type them in the chat, and we will get to them towards the end. And know that I'm available after this session to answer any of your questions. And again, it's a little bit of anecdotes from my perspective. It seems to hold true across a lot of other folks' experience, but I will also give the context of the types of courses I teach. I tend to teach analytical courses, and so I will throw in kind of a little bit of specifics related to the courses I teach and how I used MENT in the context of my course to just, allow you to be creative, or to give you some spark of innovation, or to give you some kind of ideas around what is possible, and then each one of you can take it from there. I know that a lot of the folks who are joining are academics, but perhaps you're not an academic and you're just interested in understanding how you can engage your team, maybe you manage some people. So a lot of the lessons can be, I'm going to talk about academia, obviously, but if you have a different need, I still think it will be relevant to you to think about how to engage with your community, your employees, your team, your customers, perhaps. So we can take it there if we have time. Okay, let me make sure that I can share my screen. Let me know if you see my screen now. Can you guys see my screen okay? Is that okay for now? Thumbs up is helpful always. So thank you again for inviting me. As Anat mentioned, I am a professor at the University of Virginia, the Darden School of Business. I spent a couple of years at HBS, enjoying the presence of the folks at HBS, and I learned a lot during my time there. And what I'm going to be talking about here is a culmination of my experiences at HBS, but also at Darden, and just stuff that I've been doing between my MOOC, which is asynchronous material, teaching online programs. I know some participants here are from online certificate programs that I've taught, synchronous and asynchronous, and also doing hybrid with actual students that I've been doing for many years, where folks are using technology to get engaged. This is just a little bit of my bio. I don't really want to go into too much detail about my background because our time is short. I wanted just to point to the fact that my email's there, my Twitter handler is there, LinkedIn is always there, HBAP, yes, a lot of camaraderie for folks that I know here. Please feel free to reach out. If you have any questions, let's connect out of this session. And that's why I include this slide, so you get to know exactly who I am and know that I'm not here and gone, but we can take offline any topics that you have. So my background is in decision analysis, project management. That's what I teach. I teach a lot of data science. I do a lot of work on forecasting. So the mindset that I come from is a business school professor who does work on areas of management science and forecasting. So some of what I'm going to talk about relates to those types of areas. It's not to say that the tools are relevant to anything you teach. I'm going to talk about competitions. Well, competitions are going to be relevant if you teach history, or if you teach social sciences, or if you teach English or any other language, you can always use competitions in creative ways. I'm going to be talking about engaging through Ment.io. You can definitely use Ment.io regardless of what the topic is, because there's always good debates to have. I'm going to be talking about using chats, starter code, a lot of the tools I'm going to cast from the perspective of analytics, but please feel free to go with these ideas and extrapolate to your domain. And if I can and remember, I will try and show and talk about how that can be done, but we can also get to those questions later towards the end. So my first question to you is to pause and say, you all signed up for the seminar, you're here for the webinar, you're interested in the topic, but what do we mean by hybrid? Like, what is it that we talk about when we say hybrid? Because in general, there's a lot of interpretations, and different institutions and different individuals are going about it in very different ways. So I just wanted to open your mind to the fact that hybrid can mean different things to different people. And even you, as you're crafting your course or you're putting your materials together, think big and think differently than what you used to be thinking. Because until now, most of us walked into a classroom and just delivered. Even then, some of us did some different things, like write on a whiteboard, write on a blackboard, have PowerPoint presentations, write on overheads. Some of us gave assignments in advance. Some of us gave assignments after. Those nuances are still relevant to the virtual world, but we just need to be cognizant of them and decide when to use what. So there's many different ways to cut the hybrid cake. So hybrid could mean synchronous versus asynchronous. So it could imply that you are doing some of your instruction synchronously live as we are now. If you're here, if you are one of the folks on the list, you are here synchronously with me and with Anat and with the rest of the folks at Ment. This is the fact that we are here in this slot, and any question or anything I say is influenced by what you type in your chat, and that is a synchronous mode, okay? You could also have material virtually available asynchronously, meaning that somebody goes and then whenever they want, they can click on the button, watch the video, but then they can't interact. They cannot influence the course of the conversation. They cannot provide their input. And that is true for anybody watching this recording way back in the future, not right now at this given moment. So asynchronous and synchronous classes are very important to identify, because some of your material might be better delivered asynchronously through a recorded video in advance, and some of the material is better done live. Anything that you want student input will require synchronous interaction. If you want to challenge the students, if you want to help them dig deeper, if you want them to talk to each other, then it's done to the fullest when you do synchronous sessions. If you're just trying to get some maybe theoretical ideas out, or if you're more in lecture mode, asynchronous could be useful for that. Another distinction of hybrid, one that is very popular these days, and it's all the rage for now, just given our circumstances, is in-person versus online. Some hybrid in which we have people in the room together, physically together, or maybe with masks, maybe socially distant, 6 feet apart, 2 meters apart. But you can also have people joining remotely. So you have audience in the room, but audience that is joining. That is another form of hybrid. Again, a lot of institutions from K through 12 all the way to higher ed are now experimenting with that. And even then you have to think about whether your audience is physically in the same class. I'm one professor delivering to people who are at home, but also to people who are in the room. I might be in the room, I might be at home. Or you could have two sections running in parallel. Some people meet physically and some people meet virtually. And you have to understand the distinction there. There's another form of hybrid, which is more of the flipped classroom, meaning I do some work outside the classroom or expect my students to do work outside the classroom versus lecture that I deliver in practice. I teach all of my classes through, because of the institution that I belong to, both the Darden School and Harvard Business School, we teach 100% case method. So I have the students prepare in advance. They do exercises and analysis in advance of class. We come in and we dig deeper. We kind of build on what they've done on their own. It's not exercises after the lecture was given. And so that flipped classroom has its own dynamics. So a lot of what I'm going to show you requires prep in advance, and that's the form could be this distinction. Do you want the students to get involved? Do you want them to share their screens? Do you want them to present and lead the conversation? Or is it lecture-based? Those are all important distinctions. That's all part of hybrid. Engagement is different. If you want to engage with your students, each one of these is going to entail a different type of engagement. And we just need to be thoughtful about what is the best type of engagement for these different formats. So again, I'm going to use a little bit of context, and I'll do this briefly just to show you that, for instance, in this course that this is an example of a course that I offered. This most recent, it's a new iteration is starting today, but what I'm going to show you is a lot of what I did last spring. And it's building on stuff that I've been doing for 10 years now in different, either Darden or at Harvard. This specific course, Applied Business Analytics, is all about data and using analytics and data science, machine learning, and teaching students, MBA students. I work at business school, so most of my audience are MBA students, teaching them how to be data savvy, be experts that can be those translators in business, connect between the analytics and the business side. So that's the course that I teach. Again, just a little bit of a background to show you that in my course, these are specific elements. These are experiences. This is how the students get engaged. The students, sometimes they watch videos. Sometimes they watch videos that allow them to revisit the principles of, let's say, how do data science or machine learning algorithms like random forest work or logistic regression. They want videos so they can watch it over and over again. They can pause. They can write things down. They have videos that allow them to prepare. I typically like to show videos after we've talked about it in class. So we prepare a video, but we only post it after the students have experienced. We have labs where the students can work on their own, and I can visit and I can give them advice as they progress through some work on their own. And so breakout rooms in Zoom is a really helpful way to do that because you can hop around. We also have case studies. All of my material is through real cases. You will see today a screenshot of the Ment case that I wrote specifically about the wonderful company that we're here, that has brought us all together here today. And through reading about another protagonist, some business leaders' problems or challenges or decisions, the students learn and they're inspired. And so that gets them into the seat of the decision maker, and we ask them to make decisions as if they were leaders. Other things that the students in my course see, they work with Tableau, they work with code, they compete on Kaggle, so they're getting engaged through other platforms. They also have discussions on Ment, as I will show you in a moment. The whole approach that I take is a coding dojo, meaning dojo inspired by Taekwondo. My kids do Taekwondo, and where you kind of, everybody observes as two folks are in the ring, kind of working it out, fighting it through in an elegant way. And in the coding dojo, this is kind of a term that comes from computer science. Maybe a student is leading us through an analysis, writing some code live, and they share their screen and they're taking control of the class, and everybody helps. Everybody contributes. It's a supportive environment. It's an environment where we encourage people to take risks and be vulnerable, because it's pretty stressful to share your screen and to show everybody how you code. But that's kind of the tone that I set in the classroom, and that pulls people in. And then finally, because some of my students have no background in the specific topics that I teach, then I give them templates or starter code or something that gives them a first crack at the analysis, and they can take it and dig deeper and learn through really some immersion type experience. And I find, again, this is almost like the case, it allows them to really fully internalize what it is that we are trying to do. Yes, and I like the reference to Karate Kid. Love that movie, Cobra Kai on Netflix. If you haven't seen it, you should watch it. Okay, I'm going to skip over my syllabus. Again, for those of you watching later or through Ment, I can get these slides to you. Again, this is just to show the breadth of the different topics that I cover. And I think I've discussed enough so you guys get a sense for what the materials are that I cover. Mixture of labs, self-paced labs with classes that are case discussions. Every time that there's a little star or an asterisk here, those are competitions that the students compete with each other in teams to kind of, in this case, it's a forecasting competition. It creates the juices flowing. Some of you have experienced maybe simulation. So have a mixture, discussions, lectures, videos, and then some kind of simulation or some kind of experiential kind of component to the course that again gets the students engaged and excited. In the course, there are several exciting parts. I've talked about some of these, the starter code that I mentioned that we provide in advance, videos that we create, lab sessions that allow students to work with maybe one or two partners at their own pace, and then these competitions. And so these are kind of the unique features of the course that when put together, they create a lot of engagement and a lot of ways for individuals to connect with each other. But I'm actually going to kind of go and kind of skip through. These are just screenshots again, so you get a sense for how I do it. But I want to take us to, talking and focusing on the topic that we're really here to especially consider, which is this focus of engagement, right? How do we get them involved? A lot of you maybe have more experience now with Zoom or with other video conferencing sessions like the one that we're on now. We can do polls, we can have chat going. I know a bunch of you now by, I can see the chat, so I can get to know you and who's watching Karate Kid, for instance. There are breakout rooms that we can use for those labs in which individuals get to know each other better because it's 2 people, 4 people, 5 people. They work in breakout rooms for 10 minutes, 20 minutes. But if you do this often enough, you get to talk to individuals at a more intimate setting. You can use these technologies for group meetings. I leave room in my course for teams to work together. So they come and they meet regularly to progress their work. They can use Slack. So I'm a very big believer in having a dialogue going even between classes when we don't meet synchronously, have them comment on each other. And I'll show you in a moment, Ment can serve for a similar purpose. And then we have those competitions that are especially adrenaline consuming and, there's a lot of excitement. People come together and they really get to know each other, but also internalize the material. And most importantly, they internalize what you're trying to teach them at a different level because of that frame. So let me talk to you specifically about Ment.io and tell you a little bit about how I use it in the context of the course that you just saw. So I'm going to talk about that, but I'm also going to try and leave some breadcrumbs for how you might use Ment.io in any course that you're teaching, regardless of the topic. So in my course, using Ment had 2 purposes. Okay. And again, this is kind of, so you get to see the chef in the kitchen, right? You get to understand the incentives that I have and the transparency, full transparency behind it. Working with Ment for me had 2 purposes. First, I wanted to have the dialogue. I wanted them to learn how to converse and how to think about discussing and debating in a more sophisticated way. We do it a lot verbally, we do it live, we do it synchronously, but I wanted the students to understand what would it mean to have a dialogue and an intellectual, stimulating, high quality dialogue with some feedback asynchronously. So that was one of the reasons I used Ment. Another reason is because the engine itself is a really cool use of data science. It's a forecasting platform. It has Bayesian networks in the background. It has scoring mechanism. It has everything that I love from my research. And so for me, I wanted to use the opportunity to also talk about the technology. So I had these 2 objectives going on. Other professors at HBS at Harvard used the case at the same time I used it. And they talked about they also used it to create a dialogue and a conversation and to create a conversation around knowledge analytics and how do we create knowledge? How do we share knowledge? How do we create knowledge from an organization that we may not know exactly where it exists? How do we capture it and really learn from it together? So there's a lot of ways depending on your course objectives. But again, if you're teaching political science, if you're teaching analytics, if you're teaching, geography, whatever it is that or architecture, whatever it is that you're teaching, think about your purposes and what a debate and a dialogue can do. And that's how you should use Ment. So we wrote a case, perhaps some of you have seen it, about the company and about the technology and about how it gets used. And my students had to read the case in advance of class, and they had to participate in the platform. And so they had, and what you see on the screen, and I'm not going to demonstrate in a moment in a little bit more detail, what they saw were, or they got a link, they signed up, and I had specific questions ready for them to discuss. I asked them, what should we do about graduation? I asked them, how we should be teaching analytics. I asked them, how do we solve some of the PPE problem that the world is facing under COVID? Students added their own questions that were on their mind. And then I'd let them loose. I encouraged the dialogue. They knew that we were going to revisit it, and they commented on each other's questions. They provided answers. They agreed and disagreed with each other. They asked for clarification. And so it was fascinating to see the activity throughout the week leading up to class. Again, this was an assignment that I gave before class. And so the students engaged, and they really found it exciting to comment on each other's suggestions and answers and propose other answers. And it was a lively conversation, and I enjoyed monitoring it and seeing what they were coming up with. Along the way in class, we kind of also talked about how MENT does what it's doing, but really kind of the engagement was very high. It was way higher than it would have ever been in preparation for class. Normally, prep is done on your own, maybe in your team if you're competing. In this case, the whole class was engaging with each other. Everybody could comment on each other's answers or suggestions and agreements and disagreements. And so it got a lot of, and by the way, I should say, I had 95 students in the class. So it got all 95 folks engaged. We could summarize like collaborations, who agreed with who, what was the quality of the discussion. We could kind of come up with, each student got their own profile in terms of like how agreeable they were, how thoughtful, who did they agree with most. And they found these statistics really very interesting. And so for me, the engagement ramping up to class, this was probably one of the highest like whole class, entire class engagements I had, because of the nature of the platform and because of the richness of the dialogue that I could create on it. I'm going to just summarize, and then I'll pass it back to Anat, if that's okay. I have, as the couple last slides in my deck, are do's and don'ts in terms of online and hybrid instruction and in terms of engagement. So the do's are everything that I said until this point. I will maybe pause on the don'ts. I would discourage you from having a lot of PDF and a lot of reading. I would try and have a combination of videos with readings, with discussions, with forums, with MENT, with Slack, and so on and so forth. I would also be, don't try and overwhelm the students with too many technologies and too many platforms, but try and choose the 2 or 3 that you think are going to be useful for you throughout your course. And then finally, when you teach in this format, a lot of stuff has to be done outside the synchronous sessions or outside the hybrid sessions, because you just can't get to as much material. So you need to find ways to provide that material to other participants or to the participants. And you can do that through postings after, dialogues, using the MENT platform for discussions to kind of add some depth to the conversation and add some learning. I will stop with some pictures from hybrid classrooms that I've been in recently, where we teach folks in the room. We have boards, we have Wacomms and boards, and we have students joining through Zoom remotely. All of the tools that I presented today are used in the hybrid classroom too, are useful for getting people in the room engaged with people at home and creating that sense of a single classroom, a single community learning together and growing together. So I hope that wasn't too fast, but you took some lessons from that and used some ideas. I'm going to stop sharing on that. I think if that's what you want me to do right now, for you to take over. Thank you.
Thank you, Yael. Thank you so much. It was fascinating, not too fast, just the right amount of lively and interesting, and so insightful. Thank you. I'd like to remind our participants that question and answers will be coming up shortly. I'd like to tap into a few of the points that you made, Yael, just to kind of highlight a few of the aspects on MENT.io that support these elements. The way that I normally think about MENT.io in that regard is that it does 3 things. 1, increases engagement. 2, increases collaboration. And 3, increases quality. So quality of contributions by the students. And everything that we have on the platform is meant basically to support that. The engagement, yes, the engagement, collaboration, and quality of answers. I couldn't agree more with the distinction between the synchronous and asynchronous modes. And I find that the two different functions, they behave differently on Ment.io, but they're both fully supported and really, really interesting in terms of exposing for us the level of understanding by the student and the knowledge that they have. The whole purpose of engagement is to make sure that we understand the what they bring to the classroom, right? So I think that that part is so important, and I'll share my screen just to show just to make sure that I show you what that looks like. You can see my screen, right? Okay, so just a quick overview of two things that I want to highlight in that relates to what Yael was speaking about. One of them is to say that one of the things that are so challenging in engagement is whether we can understand the general conversation or organize it when it's not a face-to-face type of conversation. So what you're seeing here is a discussion page on Ment.io, and there are different managing tools of seeing how many of my students are engaged, their activity logs, the highlights from the discussion, and so on and so forth. A second element that is, to me, very, very interesting and crucial is the fact that each student have the ability to see their own analytics. And I'll show you, I'll revisit the team analytics in a second, but I think this is really interesting to note how engagement is better when students understand what it is that they're doing and how that reflects to the larger conversation. So their level of engagement, their level of collaboration with others, how many answers they view, how many answers they responded to, who do they interact with most. That's my favorite part because of it's such a subtle nudge into, do I behave the way I would like to behave? Is my engagement appropriate to how I see my engagement and collaboration in the classroom? And the additional element is the fact that everything on their assessment, because Ment.io also helps, and that's maybe worth speaking about for about a minute or two, is to say that we have this ability to assist with the assessment of the students. And what we're doing with that assessment, and that's visible only to the professors, only to the admins in the room, is basically to look at these elements that we mentioned, to look at their level of engagement, how many actions they take on the platform, how many discussions they took part in. These two components highlight engagement, obviously. How do they collaborate with others? How much they collaborate with others? How many answers by others have they read? So again, to the issue of collaboration, knowledge, the way that we perceive it, is being generated when people speak to each other. It's not just about the students listening to us. It's not just about the intimate conversations or the conversations that they have with one another. It's the larger group that can create better knowledge. So these two highlight engagement and these two highlight collaboration. And the fifth component, of assessment is the quality of their answers, how thorough they are, how credible they are, and all this is being assembled into an overall score. And I think part of the interesting aspects of Ment.io is the fact that you can decide to disagree with our assessment. We enable to download the spreadsheet of suggested grades for you to be able to say, well, I disagree that collaboration is the most important or one of the most important features of participation or engagement in the classroom. And so I'd like to change the weights of how I assess my students. So you can do that as well. And just going back to the main page to say, basically you can post discussion questions. You can post discussion questions on Menti.io before class, during class, and after class, and basically see or view the analytics of the group all together. And each student can view their own personal analytics. And you can keep an eye on the engagement of the student and their collaboration and the quality of their answers through the platform. And so if you have, like Yael, 90 students in your classroom, which is a substantial amount of students to have even in a face-to-face classroom, I suggest using the management tools on Menti.io. That's what I do in my classes, which are way smaller, about 40 students. So I think I'll stop here with that part to leave enough room for the questions and answers, and just summarize by saying the idea is, yes, to find different technologies, not too many, that would enable us, A, to understand what the students are bringing to the table, because they are in every class. And when it's remote teaching or hybrid teaching, it is so much more challenging to understand their state of mind, their ideas, and what they understood from the material. And the additional element, it is a supporting tool in how we manage our classes, including the engagement, collaboration, and quality arguments, and especially, I have to say, also the assessment. And anyone who's devoted hours and hours each week just to make sure that they manage the discussion boards and count the number of contributions and grade the different contributions. So I'm really, really glad I was over the moon when Menti.io started doing the assessment just for that. And I think that's a sufficient supplement on my part. And I'd like to open the floor to the different questions and answers. And we have here Zvika from the Menti.io team who will raise the questions taken from either the Q&A part or the chat, and we'll be happy to answer. Yael, is that okay? Okay, perfect.
Yeah, that's great. I'm excited. I've been listening to you and hearing the questions that are great questions that are already coming. Some technical, like how is the quality scored assessed, and groupthink, how does it measure groupthink, which are great questions. So I'm excited to see what other questions emerge. So yeah.
Yeah, so definitely, hi. The first question was indeed about how the quality score is assessed and how the answers in general are ranked. As you can see from the answers within the chat, but maybe just to reiterate on that, the score is composed based on the level of contribution and the thoroughness of the arguments that was presented by the different students in class. As you saw in the analytics, and we're happy that you found the analytics to your likings, every knowledge contribution is assessed by Menti.io via a cognitive matrix. Every argument and every student has their own credibility, believability, clarity level, thoroughness level, and so on assessed. All of it is then combined to the score for each individual argument and then for each individual answer. You are right to also ask about groupthink, and that's certainly something that the platform caters for. Basically, the professor or the admin of the classes has the ability to associate segments with different students, whether it's from a specific characteristic of theirs or whether they are broken into study groups. So you can definitely see peers that are very close in their thought distance will then have lower ability to influence the overall score just because they are less obvious than independent views that are supporting the same argument. So the components of the score, to sum up, is basically regarding how much of your peers agree to your arguments or disagree with your arguments, and how thorough and balanced they are in their contribution, and all of it is presented via the analytics. I hope that clarifies in short. Just going through more questions, Marisar was asking Professor Grushka if you can relate to relevant conferences that deal with hybrid learning, if you can mention that, as well as a question by Margaret about synchronous and blended learning. How is that in compared to asynchronous modes? If you can refer to these two questions.
Sure. Let me start with the latter. Blended. So what the question is about synchronous and blended versus asynchronous learning. That's the question, right?
Yes.
So to be honest, what's interesting today is that there is some degree of I think things that we historically thought were true for the space are changing. So everything I say, take with a pinch of salt, because it is changing and people are pushing the boundaries. For instance, some platforms found better ways, like Ment, to have asynchronous engagement in which people are commenting and they really can get deeper into the nature of conversation. Until now, asynchronous courses were very individually led. So by and large, people did them on their own. They they progressed at a self pace. You could post on forums and so on, but there wasn't as much dialogue or traction there. And so until now, and still that's true for a lot of courses out there, a true asynchronous course is a very individual experience. It's great if you need to be studying, at 3 in the morning and you can only do it whenever you have time. And if you're really interested in learning some specific tools or skills, or even just enrich your knowledge in a very specific way, that's totally fine. And some people absorb it and feel happy about it and learn a lot through it. And so, but it's a very individual mode. Okay. I have a project management course on Coursera. It's been out there for 5 years now, and people appreciate it. And I'm glad that they do. And they, 2,000 people a week join still every week. And especially now in COVID, people are looking to skill up. And it's a great intro course, and people take it. It's 4 weeks. They kind of self-moderate and self-control, and they're motivated to do it. And I really appreciate that they do. I don't typically know who's doing it. Maybe one of them reaches out through LinkedIn or through, they send me an email. So I kind of get some feedback, but it's a very individual experience, and that's great. And it serves a purpose. Synchronous is great for cohort situations. If you're trying to create a cohort, meaning students that experience something together and you want to strengthen those relationships, then having a synchronous component is almost mandatory. It's I think it's nearly impossible to have a asynchronous cohort experience, a truly asynchronous cohort, a truly cohort experience where you get to know your peers, you create relationships, and you learn, most importantly, you learn from one another in a very meaningful way. And so the moment you want to have a cohort experience, having some synchronous component to it is vital. And then having all of these engagements will just add to that. It will accelerate the opportunity to create that cohort environment. It will accelerate the relationships. It will accelerate the way that people learn from each other and learn from you. And so to some degree, the professors are enablers. I can stand back and see people helping each other. And for me, that's a good thing. That's how I want the learning to occur. Of course, that means that I can then take wherever students got to together, and I can kind of get them to, yet even deeper. So I believe that that's a good model for deeper and more and a richer learning. But so that's one distinction, is like, how are my students coming to the platform? What do I want them to walk away with? And do I care about a cohort environment or not? So hopefully that's an answer to that. The second question I think that I heard was around conferences. Is that true?
Yes.
So, well, like everything, again, I'm in data science and machine learning, and there's conferences all the time, left, right, and center. There's a lot going on out there. Some of virtual. The main OPMs, so the main online platform program managers, like Coursera, like Udemy, like 2U, the large folks that are in that space, they routinely organize conferences and invite their partner schools and invite other vendors. So that's one place to look. Academia, there's special chapters in professional societies and in schools that are all about learning and pedagogy and education. And so, for instance, I'm an engineer and I'm an operations researcher, and I belong to an organization called Informs, which is the largest organization of operation researchers and management science folks. And part of Informs is an ed chapter, and so we have conferences routinely. I'm running a session in November in their conference. So there's like segments within professional societies, and then these days again, a lot of universities are coming together. I participated in several forums. There was one recently organized for anybody teaching negotiations and organizational behavior. So, if you have some mutual interest, I find that Twitter is a great place to find out about these things. Academics seem to like Twitter. Possibly more than LinkedIn. I think that if you're in industry, LinkedIn is your main avenue. If you're in academia, it seems like there's a lot of traction there, and that's how you can kind of find out about it. Sign up for some mailing lists and kind of keep tabs, and then join events like this to kind of get to know people and follow them, and then see where they're presenting next. So that's my stance on conferences. There's a lot out there, so sometimes it's hard to kind of find your niche. I've been in the past few years engaged heavily in conferences related to women in STEM. So women in data science, women coding, women are women, there's like women everything, which is awesome. So I just kind of follow that and join those conferences because I just find that it's fulfilling for me professionally. So find your niche and kind of and reach out to folks in that space.
Thank you. And I want to relate to that through the emphasis on the cohort and on the fact that we are trying to create communities of learners, and to say something about the fact that Ment.io as a platform encourages a very particular type of academic education. It's very Socratic in nature. It has the features of how do we educate, and I'll try to show you that very quickly. How do we educate the students in a way that builds, helps support that cohort? And I'll give you an example to what I mean. The students, when they look at Ment.io and they see that you can upvote and downvote and mark as insightful, and then agree, disagree, and create your agreement and create your argument, they feel it's kind of a social media thing, and it's very intuitive and very simple. However, when you look a little deeper, you understand that what we do is basically encourage them to think about discussion within this format. So the educational value of how do you construct that cohort to listen to one another, to be engaged with one another, to collaborate with one another. What you're seeing here is the fact that when they want to post a new answer, they are encouraged to write their answer and then provide supporting arguments and opposing arguments. And the conclusion of that would be, or the outcome would be, that they separate their arguments, enabling a better discussion. So you can see replies to a particular comment, and the additional element is the fact that they need to decide whether they agree or disagree to a particular answer, which enables us to better manage the discussion. But the main point is the fact that, yes, I relate very strongly to what you're saying about building a community for the cohort, even if it is using asynchronous mode on Ment.io, which is my favorite tool of technology, because what I do is I let them discuss during the week, regardless of the live sessions or before or after, right? Because that's always the case. And you can see how they get to know each other much better. I think it's also the appropriate place to mention the fact that Ment.io integrates into all LMSs, so Moodle, Canvas, Blackboard, D2L, also into Microsoft Teams. And most importantly, I find for students, it sends email notifications so they can get on the platform when it's convenient for them. And our average time for a student on the platform is 20 minutes. So they choose the right time, they read what others are writing, and then they contribute a thoughtful, they bring their brains to the table, I'd say very, very bluntly, right? And so I think that's a very important contribution. Zvika, do we have time for, can we take one more?
Yeah, just to quickly mention a few more items. Some of you even mentioned on the chat that Ment.io kind of creates a community. So I wanted to share with you the fact that we have created a Ment team that is dedicated for the purpose of this webinar, and I'm actually sending you the link here on the chat if you can see it. anyone can basically come in and participate, and maybe we can create sort of a best practices where you can talk to each other and share your thoughts about hybrid learning, what you are doing, what are the do's and don'ts, and anything around that. So please feel free to use this link and sign up. I think it will give you some hands-on experience with the tool, and we are also there on the team and are happy to collaborate with you and see whether it's an opportunity to start this interesting community. So please follow that link that I sent over the chat. Just a few more points. There were several questions here on pricing, and we shared the link about our pricing page, just because we are aware of that the semester for some of you has already started, and we really want you to leverage Menta.io. If you see the benefit here, then we have a special promotion for the participants of the webinar, where you can get, if you sign up and want Ment for the entire semester, you will get it on the price of just 1 month, but get it for the entire semester. So that's a promotion that is dedicated for the participants of the webinar. By the way, you can obviously email us, and we have a dedicated email address, which is webinars@Ment.io. I will share that as well on the link. So feel free to contact us with any question about usage, pricing. I saw some security questions, so I'm definitely happy to share more information about how secure the platform is and how it adapts for the relevant security measures. I think we addressed also some questions about languages. So yeah, because we're not analyzing the text itself, but the patterns of agreements and disagreements between the arguments, it's important to say that we support all languages. We are proud to have users of Ment in various languages in pretty much all continents. So feel free to use Ment.io in the language of your choice. Any other question that comes, we are happy to address. We have a couple of more minutes. I'm obviously feel free to share that with us. Maybe there was a question before by Anna. You did want to see some more example of activities. I don't know if Anna, you want to share your screen again while questions continue to come in.
Sure. And in the meanwhile, I'll also say something about the different scoring mechanisms that the platform enables or supports. So as you can see, each answer on Ment.io receives a score. And the scoring mechanism is based on the elements that I've shown you earlier. I'll show you again in a second. It's looking basically for the answers to be as thorough in the reasoning as possible, to be robust, to be rigorous in their reasoning, and as many supporting arguments of that original argument or the original answer, the better it is for the scoring of that particular answer. And let me show you a few more. Oh yes, and I'll show you a quick example of something that I hadn't shown you before. So 2 things about this particular page. This is an example of a discussion. You can see the different answers and their scoring, and you can also see that this discussion had been recapped by the admin, by the instructor of this particular class. The idea is that if the discussion was open, let's take, for example, in an asynchronous mode for 4 days, then before the next session, before the next class, the instructor goes on the platform, has a look at the different highlights of the discussion, overviews the different answers, and then can write a discussion recap leading towards the next section, also choosing supporting answer. This is the instructor doing out of the list of proposed answers. And another interesting element that we have on the platform, if I'll take this answer, for example, I can overview the agreements and disagreements, and I can overview the comments like this, but I can also overview the different answers only according to the agreements and disagreements. So if I decide not to read each and every comment, but have an understanding of how my students view this particular answer. So I have this analytics button enabling this visual mode so I can understand the agreements and disagreements. I basically have different types of information regarding the answers in the answer level, in the team level, and also in the personal level for each participant. So in general, what I normally suggest, and I'm interested to hear what Yael would think about this, when I manage Menti.io discussions for my classes, and I see this with many of our users, I tend to stay hands off of the discussion itself. I don't take part in the discussion. What I do is I view what they write, and then if I want to give a general guideline, such as please provide more evidence or great work, but how about some counter arguments or arguments to the contrary. So I use this announcements button to write it here. Once I post it, it sends an email notification to the entire team. So I get to speak with them, but I still enable this mode of please collaborate amongst the classroom rather than share your thoughts only with me. And one of the most powerful experiences that we witness on Menti.io, what we hear from the students, is to say that they feel appreciated by the fact that they are being read, that they're being listened to, so to speak. So their peers are reading what they write and they react. The platform scores the answers according to their quality, which encourages them to do better in terms of the arguments that they're making. And the instructor, the professor, overviews the discussion. And what normally we recommend to do is to take highlights from the Menti.io discussion and incorporate that into the live or the synchronous session that you would have with your students. So I'm kind of putting all these bits of information here, but I think, again, nowadays it is very, very, it is highly necessary to provide as much help as we can. That's also the idea of the promotion code. So you will get a chance, all participants, to use Menti.io still during this semester, which is so demanding and unusual.
Can I add something else on that to your point? So you made some great points. One thing that I really love is the fact that when we're in a live synchronous session, you can only hear from so many students. Like we just run out of time, and transitions are clunky, and it's unmute yourself and so on. With the platform, you kind of get more voices into the conversation, so everybody can express their opinion. And you can see people. And I liked your charts of the agree, disagree. Like suddenly you see a much broader perspective, and you can get to hear from more students than you would otherwise. And so it kind of also helps you to go to those students when you meet them. It's like, oh, you made this comment, let's dig deeper. And those are people that you may otherwise you would have not heard from. Like they would have been quiet, or you wouldn't have had time to get to them. And everybody has an opinion, but in an hour and a half or even 2-hour conversation, you can only hear from so many students. And so this idea of providing space for everybody to vocalize their opinion, to engage with each other, and have that integral into the course, and incentivize them. Tell them that you're going to be looking at it. Tell them that it's participation points. Tell them that they're gonna, I don't know if grade necessarily, but like encourage them to engage. Tell them that you expect them to post 3 times. Those kinds of things can help really bring out some quieter voices and some folks that you may have otherwise not heard from. And that's always a great thing. So
I thank you for that. I completely understand. I completely agree. And not only understand your point, but also want to say that I find with remote teaching more than anything else that when preparing, you mentioned how we shouldn't be teaching the same or expecting to cover the same extent of materials as we did in live sessions. Yeah. And what I find Menti.io to do for me in this respect is the fact that when I see what students don't understand, I pick and choose the materials that are more important for me to elaborate on and to share with them, rather than just try to cover everything that I had planned. So even in that regard, that helps me understand the students better. Yeah. Thank you. We have very little time left. Zvika, any additions or?
Yeah, so again, for those of you who are experiencing FOMO, so I think there's already like a dozen people from the webinar who are already on the dedicated MEN team that we created, and I think Rob is the first one to comment there, so thank you, Rob. Again, please feel free to reach out. We are at webinars at Ment.io. Remember our promotion, which we really want to help you kind of onboard quickly for that semester. I leave it back to Anat and Yael to say summarizing words.
Yael, do you want to say something before I wholeheartedly?
Sure. Yeah, we've had a great engagement here. It's been great to get to know some folks through the chat. Many great comments about the use of MENT and questions, different languages, different needs, faculty meetings. I love the idea of using it for faculty meetings. Oh my goodness, it would solve so many problems. So I think that it's great to see folks showing up, and good luck with the semester, and find new tools, be willing to experiment, you know, and engage, and know that there are people like myself, like everybody here, who are looking for this conversation. So reach out so we can help each other kind of know what works, what doesn't work, and find better ways to improve our instruction. It's not, you know, the challenges that we're faced with COVID are unfortunate, but let's at least take it as an opportunity to, you know, find new skills and new tools for rainy days. And then when we go back to the classroom, we'll know that we have those in the back pocket. And even maybe one class out of 12, we create a new and a different experience, and we'll all be better off for it. So yeah. Oh,
that's a wonderful conclusion. Yael, thank you so much for taking the time, the energy to enlighten us in so many different ways. Thank you so much. And thank you to all engaged participants. I think we're creating a great community here. So thank you so much, all of you, and keep safe, take care. Thank you.
And thank you for having this, MENT. This is very, this is great to have avenues like this to discuss it. So thank you.
Thank you, Yael.
Yeah. Bye, guys. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.